Welcome everyone to Hacking the Academic Conference. Today we'll be joined by a group of people, but first of all, my name is Tasha Overpeck. I am the event planner here at AAP within the School of Arts and Sciences at Johns Hopkins University. To introduce our first speaker, we have Dr. Tristan Cabello. He is Associate Director for the Master's of Liberal Arts at Johns Hopkins University. He holds a PhD in history from Northwestern University. He is a historian of race, gender, and sexuality in the 20th century America. And with that, I'll give it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Tasha, and welcome everybody to the webinar. This is the second webinar of a three-part series that we are having in the first couple of months of 2021 here. The first one was about doctoral studies after AAP. This one's about academic conferences. And the third one that we will be having in March is about academic publishing. And so those are webinars designed to help AAP students who would like to pursue an academic career after AAP. As you know, AAP is mostly professional degrees. However, what we find more and more often is that a lot of students are using their AAP degree as a stepping stone towards an academic career. Yet, this webinar is really for everybody at AAP. Everybody wants to present at conferences. I teach, as Tasha just said, in the Master of Liberal Arts, and I teach a lot of research courses, a lot of capstone courses, and I'm always amazed at the very high quality of the research. And so a couple of years ago, I started asking students to present at conferences. And usually the feedback that I was getting was, why me? Why would I present at a conference? I've never done that. I'm not a scholar. I've never done any type of public speaking. And so most of the time, with a little help from their advisor, from me, most students would actually get accepted to conferences and have a wonderful experience. And so you will hear from those students later on tonight. And so if you think that you're not scholarly enough to present at an academic conference, you're wrong. Most of the time you have all the good skills and the qualities and the intellectual abilities, of course, to present at an academic conference. So this is my information. I'll share it also at the end of the webinar, but you should, of course, feel free to email me if you have any questions, and also feel free to add me on Instagram and Twitter. So why going to an academic conference? There are several reasons to do that. First, when you go to an academic conference, you will learn a lot about all the up and coming research in your field. That is the research that has not made it yet to publication. That is really the new trends in your field. And so you can compare your own scholarship to the scholarship of those peers who are doing the same type of work. Secondly, it's very interesting to go to academic conferences because you can network. You can network with all the scholars in your field, and those can be potential colleagues, potential employers, or even future students. Most of the AAP students who have gone to academic conferences have done this because they wanted to also pursue a PhD after their masters at AAP. So this is very important for a PhD application to build a CV that has several academic presentations on it and publications. And finally, it's really a good way to improve your public speaking skills because you will be presenting in front of sometimes a very large audience. And so this is really good training for public speaking. There are really different types and many types of academic conferences depending on your field of study. Usually those conferences are one-day or multi-day events which means that sometimes you can stay a whole weekend at the conference hotel and listen to presentations. But there are, to me, really, I would say, four types of conferences. You have your local conferences. And so what I say by local is not only where you are located, that is in the town where you are located, what are the universities that are doing conferences, but also the conferences that are organized by your home school, by your home program, your home degree. For example, in the Master of Liberal Arts, we have a colloquium every year where students do present their work. So check with your program, check with your school to see if they are not offering a conference every year. Then you have a lot of regional conferences. Most of the national organizations, say the American Communication Organization, the American Historical Association, have regional chapters. And so it's very interesting, it's very important for you to check those regional chapters because they could be an entryway into the more broad national conference. You have also, and those are really the most important ones and usually the most difficult one to present at, national and international conferences. Every field of study in the US has a national conference, a national organization. Historians have the American Historical Association. People who are in communication have the American Communication Organization. And for example, people who work like me in the liberal arts and many of the students that you will hear about later on in the webinar who are liberal arts students usually go to the Association for Graduate Liberal Studies Program. Those are the big names in the field, and those are usually the most difficult conferences to get into, to be accepted to present. And finally, you have some more specific, more focused subject area conferences. There are specific conferences for, let's say, the study of the 70s, specific conferences for the study of Atlantic relationships, specific conferences for the study of women's American history, for example. So there are also subfields here which represent really a niche. And those are also extremely difficult to get accepted into. So let's take an example. Let's say you are a master's student in government at AAP, and your field of study is the Carter administration. You can check out first if there are any local conferences that you could potentially attend near where you live. That is to say, a Department of Political Science, for example, may have a graduate student organization that organizes a conference every year, or your own program. You can also, of course, check the regional conferences and the national conferences. The American Political Science Organization organizes a conference every year, but in that case, you could also go to the American Historical Association, for example. And then you can also check if there are specific subject areas conferences in this field, say the Carter administration, say the 1970s, early 1980s, to present your work. So there are really many different types of venues here to present your work. It's a good idea to start at the bottom, so with a local regional conference, and then graduate to the most difficult ones. How do you apply to a conference? The principle is always the same. You have to submit an abstract, sometimes a long time in advance. In my field of study, history, all the conferences are happening in January. It is not rare that most applicants would submit their application in the summer for a conference that usually happens 6, 7 months later. The abstract is a very formulaic form of writing, and it's usually it usually adhere to the same rules, and it's just a couple of sentences. You have maybe no more than 600 words to make your case, so make sure that each word counts here in your description. You start usually with a catchy introduction that grasps the attention of the reader. Sentence number 2 is usually simply the title of your paper. I am going to explore XYZ. The most important part of your proposal, your abstract, is probably sentence 3 and 4. Sentence 3 is your research question, and your research question has to identify a problem that needs to be solved, a problem that could get anybody interested in. And sentence number 4 is usually your argument. And your argument is the novelty, the newness that you bring to the table in terms of scholarship. It's also a good idea after that to show that you know who are the scholars in your field, and to show that you know that you have identified a scholarly contribution and a scholarly gap. How do you prepare once you get accepted for the conference? One, it is a very good idea to write your paper fully. It sounds very boring, but most presenters at academic conferences actually read their paper loud. So this is the way it's done. There's not a lot of space for creativity here. So it's a good idea to rehearse your paper, to prepare your PowerPoint, and most importantly, you will have between 8 to 12 minutes to present your research. So it's very important that you train yourself to be within those limits. Because believe it or not, but if you're not done, the chair of the panel will cut you off. But a conference is much more than that. It's also about attending other people's papers and presentations. So it's a good idea to look at the program before you go and make a list of all those panels that you want to attend, usually the panels that relate to your research. It's also a good idea to make a list and to schedule this beforehand of what I call coffee meetings. You will meet future employers there, you will meet colleagues, you'll meet future students, you'll meet people who research in your area. And so it's a good idea to be in contact with them before you go to the conferences, and make an appointment to see if they're available to meet with you. And finally, most of those conferences happen in large cities. And so because it is also very expensive to travel to those places, it is a good idea to make a city schedule. That is to say, who are the colleagues in that city that you could potentially meet to? Or if you are doing research, what are the archives, the libraries that you haven't had time to visit during the year, and that you can make time to visit now because you are in a specific city? So all of this, of course, relates to conferences the way they were before COVID. It's a little bit different now because most conferences happen online. But when things resume to normal, it is very likely that you will go again to conferences and that you will spend several days in the same town, in the same city. Going to conferences is very expensive. It can cost up to, let's say, if you're staying within the United States, up to $2,000. Right? Why? Because you have to pay for your airfare, you have to pay for the hotel. Usually, the hotel where the conference is located at is more expensive. You have to pay a lot of conference fees, and those fees are, we can talk about this with the panel too, but Those fees are usually pretty steep, between $50 to $300. There's usually a discount for students. So it can add up very, very quickly, up to $2,000. So you need to explore your funding options here. Inquire your school and your program about the availability of funds. This is not something that we usually do at AAP because we're not with more professional programs. But if you continue with a PhD, for example, this is something very common. You will have funds available to you to travel to conferences. For example, if you're going with a PhD at Johns Hopkins, you will have funds to travel to conferences. The organizing body too, let's say the American Political Science Organization, has also funds. So it's a good idea to apply for those fellowships as well. And finally, it's probably also a good idea to talk to your advisor, your academic advisor, to see if if he or she is aware of any fellowships or any funds that you can apply for. What do you do after the conference? It's very important after the conference that you inquire about the possibility of proceedings. A lot of conferences have published proceedings after the conference, so this is a good opportunity for you to publish your first paper, or since the paper should be already written, it's really a good opportunity for you to be able to present your research. Make sure that if you are given, let's say, a video of your presentation, that you publicize this presentation on your social media, on LinkedIn, etc., etc. Inquire also about awards. Okay? You may not even have been aware of it, but people may have been voting for your presentation to win an award, and you may have won an award. Okay, I've seen that happen regularly in my career. I'm getting emails from colleagues to inquire about students some of my students who are not even aware that they won awards at conferences that they went to. It's also very important to stay connected with the people that you met. Okay, so make sure that you add them on social media. If you have met a senior colleague, it's also probably a good idea to think of much more formal, thank you email, or an employer, for example, send a thank you email. And finally, talk to your program. If your program doesn't know, or your advisor doesn't know that you have presented at a conference, it's very important that you mention that. Why? Because your advisor would love this. And also, this shows that the program is generating scholarship, and that students are being active scholars in their field. And that's very important for your program and for your schools. So those are the preliminary remarks that I wanted to make here. And so for the next 20 minutes, we will have a conversation with our panelists here. And then towards the end, we'll have also 15-20 minutes for a Q&A. So it's really a pleasure for me to introduce our four panelists. We have first Meredith Bush. Meredith Bush was an MLS student. She's an AAP alumni. Meredith is now a PhD student at Liberty University. She is researching women's history in America, and she's also hosting a podcast on women's history. And Meredith presented at several conferences during her time at AAP, most importantly, the MLA Colloquium and also the AGLSP conference. Lauren Barnard is also a former AAP student from the MLA program. Lauren has presented several times at the MLA Colloquium, and she's currently completing a book on the research that she did in the MLA program. and she's also soon to be a law school student. We have also Nina Lewis, who is an AAP alumni as well. Nina has presented her research at the AGLSP, I believe at the American Cultural Association too. And so Nina is a former MLS student and also has received her BA from the University of Arizona Global Campus. And we have also Brian Garner. Brian Garner is a former AP student too from the MLA program, has presented her research in many, many conferences, the AGLSP, the American Cultural Association too, I believe. And he is currently an interdisciplinary scholar, PhD student at the Union Institute. And I have to say also that Brian won the Best Paper Award at the AGLSP conference and is also the editor for the Journal of Veteran Studies. So if I can bring all the panelists on camera. And my first question to you guys, first, thank you so much for coming. It's a pleasure to see you all. My first question to you is, as you have seen during the presentation, there are many reasons why students choose to attend a conference. My question to you is very simple. Why did you decide to do that? What was the interest? Meredith, would you like to start?
I can start, yeah.
Yeah.
Mainly, you made me interested by suggesting it, but it's something I'd always wanted to do. And I think that I wanted to see how comfortable I felt in that academic space to see if that was where I wanted to move forward.
Good point. Nina?
Again, I have to agree with Meredith. Tristan was my introduction to it. I kind of went into the program with a one-track mind. You know, I wanted to get my master's. I already knew what I was working on. I wanted this degree to enhance the work that I was already doing. And so until it was brought up to me, I didn't even know an opportunity like that existed. Because I hadn't gotten involved in anything like that prior in my past program. So when the opportunity arose, I was initially like, huh, do what? What do you mean what now? And it was really interesting because of the content that I was writing. It's like, oh yeah, you send this off. You need to do this. And so that's why I ended up doing it.
Yeah, and Nina, can you identify what was the, I would say, you know, where did this shyness come from? Where did this this reservation about going to conference came from? Because you're not shy in real life, right? I mean, like it's so yeah. So
no, not really. I grew up as a creative artist, so I've been performing since I was 4 years old, and so part of my study has actually been opening more of this door of conversation between arts and academics, and that's really where I work the best at. And so once I'm off stage, it's kind of like, yeah, I'm a little shy, but the public speaking part of it wasn't going to be a problem because I know how to get up in front of an audience. I know how to work the room and, you know, all of that. But I had been used to doing that more so in an artistic fashion and not in the academic setting. So that was kind of daunting because I thought maybe 3 or 4 people would come in the room and I would just kind of whisper out my paper. And it was a packed room. And I was like, oh, okay.
Lauren, I remember that you gave a fascinating and excellent presentation at the MLA Colloquium. Can you share also your experience?
It was really the best opportunity for getting to meet my fellow classmates and connecting with everybody and getting to hear what they were working on. And I enjoyed sharing my paper, and I got some feedback on it from a guy who had attended the program about 20 years prior, and it's just great to get to experience Johns Hopkins in person, and also get to meet you and some of the other professors.
So yeah, so it's important for everybody who's listening to this webinar that you check with your program, because most of them are actually doing that type of colloquia. And so it's a good opportunity, especially for those programs like the MLA program that are mostly online, and it's a lot of programs at AAP, to meet face-to-face with your fellow students and professor. Brian, would you like to share your experience too?
Sure, yes. And just going along with the theme, everything from this level on, no matter where you are in your academic or scholarly career, it's about community. It's about joining the community. And these are the opportunities. I participated in the 2018 and 2019 colloquia with the MLA program. And nervous as I'll get out, unlike Nina, I was afraid to speak in public. But it was a great experience because it was an opportunity to, get my ideas out there. It's one thing to just write a paper, but it's another thing to just express it and be able to enter into a conversation about it. And so that's great. And also with, like with Lauren, who I met at the colloquium in 2019, it was a great opportunity to meet other students in the program. It was a great opportunity to meet other instructors, and just be in that community of scholars. So it was, that's what was great about it.
Yeah, very good point. Can you guys share your experience with writing the abstract? Is what I have talked about in the presentation mostly accurate? What would you add?
Well, I guess
Brian?
I'll jump in.
Yeah.
I think you hit all the key points. You want to have a targeted title that is pertinent to the pertinent to that conference. What's important is to know your audience. What's important is to know what that conference is about, what the significant stakeholders are, what's important to them. And so you want to have something that resonates with them. It's important to address that, to make sure. So, I mean, and it doesn't mean that you just pander. It means that you take your work and see how it can be weaved into whatever the theme is or whatever domains that they would want to discuss. So it's an opportunity to stretch your ability to take your scholarship, what you're passionate about, and make it meaningful to whatever audience. And so and that's what I had the opportunity to do with the AGLSP. Yeah. I really did something that was different. I mean, my area of research is in one particular domain, but then I took that and applied it through, for example, the lens of the Harlem Renaissance. And so I mean, a lot of what I talk about is, patriotism and Black masculinity and veterans, but I was able to, weave that through a lens of the Harlem Renaissance, and it was something that stretched me. It was something that provided me an opportunity to be able to reach an audience different than what I probably normally would have been in a conversation with. So it was a great opportunity that way.
Yeah, and it's always very important, and I'm talking to everybody here on the panel, but also to our audience, to make sure that your research is relatable to people who are not in your field, because most of the time the number one question you will get at a conference is, Brian is an historian of race, patriotism, sports, and you have a political scientist of the 1970s who's going to say, hey, how does that relate to my research? And so you have to be, ready to, and most of the time, questions do relate, but you have to be ready to answer that question. And I would also, of course, agree with the importance of the title. It's very important to have a title that's catchy. Let's say in a couple of words, put things together, that just catch the eye. And so, for example, that was something that I think Nina did very well, because I remember that at the AGLSP, you had a very cool title with things, that I would have never guessed, would come together. And I think it was superheroes, salvation. And so, of course, that paper, having gone to conferences, for the past 10 years, I knew that paper will bring, an audience, because that's definitely, what in the field we will call, a sexy title. I mean, it's a very good title. It's a title that does attract, people and an audience, because it's very relatable. Everybody watches superheroes, but nobody really thinks about that, in with that lens. Nina, can you share more about how you came up with the abstract?
Sure. So one of the things that I would add in writing an abstract is to make sure you're writing about something, first of all, that you actually care about,
Yeah.
that you have some level of passion for it, because you will have to write down all your thoughts, and it can become very mundane if you're doing something that you kind of like halfway are interested in but not really. And being an artistic person, I got a thing for comic books and comic book characters and the whole thing. I was a very, very big fan of Stan Lee, and a lot of people didn't realize that what he had tried to do with comic books was address a lot of the racial tension in our country through his characters. And a lot of them were based on civil rights activists and leaders who had tried to bring the country together. And so I started looking at that and just trying to figure out what I wanted to say and how I wanted to present that. And I ended up talking about how America's obsession with comic book movies revealed a subconscious need to be rescued. And so in exploring that and starting to write down all of these thoughts, and as I put together this abstract, and I sent it to Tristan, like, check this out and see if this is okay, because this is my first time, and I'm like, it doesn't really sound scholarly. And so I knew there would be some questions like, is she seriously talking about comic books at the AGLSB? Like, is that what we're doing here? And it made a lot of sense. But because I cared about it, and there was some substance behind all of the superficial portion of it, it worked out really well.
Yeah, of course. Whenever you provide, something, a new interpretation to something that's so popular, like comic books, I mean, it always draws, an audience, and people get interested, because that type of lens, can be applied to so many different fields. And so people come to you, and they're like, oh, wow, I can actually apply that also to my own research. Meredith, would you like to share something about the abstract? How was your experience?
For me, definitely the course that we took on graduate research methods helped immensely. The feedback from the other students, just the types of questions you get help you really hone your message like down and whittle it down to, this is actually what I was trying to get across, not something completely different. I think the things that we've talked about already, like the title, I think is really important. And I found myself, just like Brian said, to kind of tweaking things to match with the themes of conferences. But I think what most excited me about it was that like teaser trailer part of it, to like not give it away, but make it interesting and intriguing. I think that was really my goal.
Yeah, and you bring a very valid point here, and that's usually a point that students overlook. The work that you do in your courses can be presented at conferences. Okay, and it's not just research method, it's not just your capstone. Of course, your capstone can absolutely be presented at conferences, but it's also the work that you do in other classes. Most of the work that I'm seeing in my electives and with other AAP programs and other AAP students, not just MLS students, is very strong. And so in most of the national conferences, you could present this type of work. It's very high quality. Lauren, would you like to add something on the abstract?
Sure. I think finding your topic is so difficult. Um, Pointed out in research methods class to look for holes in the research, look for questions that were posed, and that really helped me. So I started on one path of being interested in Amazon warrior women in ancient Eurasia. And then I found that was really over researched and I didn't feel I had anything new to add, but the two people groups um, that were their cultures, the Scythians and Sarmatians, they had a strong animal symbolism. And I became fascinated by the deer, which kept popping up over and over in their iconography. Um, and there was a lot of disagreement about the meaning and the value of the deer in their culture. And I kept following that question, was able to really build on the evidence and the other research out there that the deer could have been the guide to the celestial sphere and the underworld for those cultures. And it was in their grave sites and it really all lined up. So it was a really daunting topic because it's a very understudied cultural area. And a lot of the research is written in Russian. So it took really obsessive, perpetual focus and reading every bibliography I could get my hands on to find what I was looking for.
Of course, and also with such a specific topic, like this one that maybe qualify as obscure. It's also very important to relate this to the general public, right? Because a lot of times when you go to those conferences, you have people with different backgrounds, with different level of preparation too, and so it's very important to make sure that everybody's research or your research translates to the general public here. One last question, guys. What did you get out of this experience? What was the most memorable thing that you got out of this experience? It could be anything from the presentation, the people you met, how it opened up doors for you. What changed really? Meredith, I feel like or Meredith, Lauren?
Oh yeah. So I think that the MLA colloquium was the best place for me to start. And I'm really glad I did that because it felt like a much safer space. And so I had takeaways from there, what I wanted to apply with in my presentation to the AGLSP. What was my most favorite takeaway from the conference was the networking. I met a really fantastic, accomplished woman and ended up having lunch together. She had a podcast. She told me about her podcast, which is how I started going on my own podcast, talking about how you can weave it in with your graduate studies and also find an audience. She encouraged me and she's helped me with advice on it. And I think that was my biggest takeaway, but also learning how I need to be more adaptable in front of an audience because things got kind of shuffled at the last minute and I ended up in a different breakout session than I was originally planned. And I don't think that I adjusted to the type of audience that I had. And so I really just learned more things that I need to work on. So I need to go to more conferences to work on them. So.
Yeah, exactly. And you bring up a very good point. I mean, of course, the first conference that you present at is going to be nerve-wracking. I mean, it's going to be and so it's a good idea to start with a local or your programs conference, and then to graduate to conferences that are a little bit more difficult to handle, but of course start at the beginning, right, when you want to present. Nina, do you have anything that you want to share? What was the most important thing that you get out of this experience?
I would say the most important thing was realizing that I wanted to do more things like that. That I wanted to take advantage of those kinds of opportunities. I wanted to publish. I wanted to you know, I wanted more feedback and more questions, and I appreciated the opportunity to have to present in front of other scholars who would question your work, who would question, you know, the holes in your research, so you have something to go back to and fill in later. Because if you want to publish, that's a great experience to have people bring up those questions you may not think yourself, because this is what you really want to do. And having been an author, and I've, you know, published novels, but I haven't done anything academically. So with that opportunity presented, is like a light bulb came on, like, you know, you can do this, girl. Get on in there. So yeah, I loved it.
Lauren, you decided to keep on with writing a book, I think, about this presentation, no? Or about your research?
Yes, I'm so fascinated that I really want to develop a book about all the kind of 3 different groups of animals in these ancient cultures that are a part of their vision of the world tree. So you have the birds of the celestial element, and the herd animals of the earthly element, and then the wolves and the predators of the underworld, and kind of set the book up that way and explore these cultures and their beliefs.
So that's also, you know, that was part of the inspiration started when you presented your project, or it was enhanced? Yeah, okay. Brian, can you share what did you get out of those conferences during your tenure at the MLA program? I think you went to quite a few.
I went to the 2018 and 2019 colloquia, but you know, like Nina indicated, it's that I aspired to eventually want to get published, but the beginning was to, like you said, participate in, you know, the program opportunities to be able to present. And so so I can really speak to that. There is an arc that I experienced from participating in the MLA colloquia to having an opportunity to, you know, present at AGLSP, and from that, then, you know, also the networking, as you know, Meredith brought up. But, you know, but then it afforded me, and through that networking, it afforded me an opportunity to be invited to be a guest editor for, you know, special edition for Scholarly Journal. All these things began with just being scared to present at, you know, the 2018 colloquia, and then following up with that experience by, you know, just keep trying, keep working at it. And all.
Sure.
So, you know, what did I get out of it? I gained more confidence out of it. I, you know, like Nina pointed out, I tested out my ideas. You know, my ideas developed and grew, and my scholarship developed and grew as I walked along. So yeah, it was a great opportunity that way.
Yeah, and so you brought up, guys, 2 things that are like really important about conference, and that really like 3 things, I guess, really what conferences are about. 1, improve your skills, you know, as a public speaker. 2, get feedback on your paper. That's really important. That's massively important, you know. And I know that a lot of students are actually scared of getting hard questions. You want hard questions, okay? Even if you say, well, you know what, I had never thought about this, because those hard questions, you know, are what is going to make your work stronger. Okay, so you want those hard questions, and people are not here, you know, to trap you, to trip you. I mean, they're here to help. They really want to make sure that your work is as good as it can be. And as Meredith, you know, mentioned, in a program, and Meredith is also now a PhD student, you know, when you are in a program like the MLA program, or like any really program at AAP, and even more so in a PhD program, you do have students with you, your colleagues that share somewhat of the same interest, but not completely. And sometimes it can be hard. I mean, I don't think that I have met a student, another student like Nina, who did research on comic books, for example. I don't think that I've met another student like this in the MLA program. But going to conferences helps you network and helps you meet people who share the same interest, okay? And it could be anything really. It could be, for example, getting tips about doing a podcast. You know, not everybody does podcasts in academia. And so with Meredith, you know, for example, it helped her, you know, launch her podcast as well. I want to go to the questions. I think we have a few, and Tasha, I can actually read them because we have, I think we have two questions here. We have three questions. Is the MLA colloquium exclusive to MLS students, or is it open to other AAP departments? No, it is exclusive to MLS students. To present, you can, however, attend, but a lot of programs have their own colloquium, so please check with your program. A good question from Michael. Any tips on what to look at for in call for papers advertisement? To look out for in call for paper advertisement. That is, how do you look out for call for papers? And so depending on your field of study, Michael and the panelists can help me here. There is usually a website. There's, for example, for the social sciences and the humanities, there is usually a website that you can consult that lists all the conferences that are going on in your field. For the humanities and the social sciences, it's a good idea to check h-net.org. That has all the call for papers for the upcoming conferences. Panelists, do you have any other websites that you visit for call for papers?
CFP list.
CFP list, of course.
CFP list, University of Pennsylvania list as well.
And it's a good idea also, but just to check with your program if they know of other websites or the national organizations in your field. What should I expect submitting proposals for conferences that are not necessarily catered for graduate students? Does it hurt my chances of having my proposal being considered? I have to say that the AGLSP, for example, where most students tonight presented, is open to also non-student scholars, so professors in the field. It does not hurt at all. I think that in most call for papers, actually, you do not get to identify who you are. If you're a student, a full-time faculty, a tenured professor, this is not taken into consideration. So I encourage everybody to actually apply for, even if you're a student, a graduate student at a national conferences, which 3 of our panelists today did. Please do apply. You have a lot of chances to be accepted. That's it for our Q&A today. And I just wanted to give you an opportunity, panelists, to share anything that you wanted to share. Is there anything that you would like to share?
I think presenting at a conference is so nerve-wracking, and I have a friend that does some speech coaching, and she did a little session with me, and she said, you have to think about you're presenting a gift to your audience, and you can't control how they react to that gift. And that's not really your concern. Your concern is to just be so excited to share your
absolutely. And I totally agree with your friend. I mean, this is something that you've worked a lot on. And I have to tell you also, audiences are very different from conferences to conferences. I have often presented the same papers because it's something that you can absolutely do at different conferences, and the feedback that I got was often very different. Okay, it all depends the type of scholars, the type of audience that you will encounter. You know, for example, at the AGLSP, the audience is pretty friendly. But it turns out that at some other conferences, the audience might not be. And that's completely okay. It's another experience, you know, I mean, it's just experiencing different types of audience. During your career as public speakers, as scholars, the audience will not always be responsive, and that's okay. That's just, it has nothing to do with you most of the time. It has to do with the audience. Anything else?
That was very close to what I was going to say. Even when the audience is less receptive. But I did read an article that said something that I really appreciated. That was, your resume, your CV doesn't say whether you did great or not. It just says that you presented. And so that really helped me fight my imposter syndrome. So don't let yourself get in your way.
Absolutely. And yeah, and if I can add something also, Meredith, you pointing to a good thing here, an important point here. Remember also that for an academic CV, you can actually list all the papers that were accepted at conferences. It's something that people do in academia. So even though you do not get to present, or you choose not to present at the conference, remember that you can list those papers that have been accepted. Nina, one last word? No?
I would just say, you know, give yourself a short time to be afraid and do it. Just do it. It's going to be an experience that's going to be valuable. Either way it goes, it'll be valuable for you, and look forward to what you're going to learn about yourself, and not just the paper itself. And as Tristan has told me time and time again, don't be afraid to change your ideas. It'll change over and over and over again. It may get scaled back. It may, you know, you have more to add to it. Don't be afraid of that. And if you can, take the research course before you do a conference. I did it backwards. And I took graduate research.
Yeah, that's right.
That was my last course in my whole program. And when I got finished, I was like, oh my gosh, I should have known all of this before I went to AGL.
Yeah, good point. Brian, one last word, maybe?
You know, I think the biggest takeaway is to understand that you're joining into a conversation. Think of it that way. When you're entering into the scholarly realm, you're joining a conversation. So this is your contribution to the broader conversation.
Yeah.
And so, you know, let that be what guides you.
Absolutely. And that's really what the conference is about, really. I mean, it's a very good point here. When you write an article, you are in conversation, but this conversation happens in writing, of course. At the conference, you will see those people and you will have a conversation with them. And so that's really about the intellectual exchange, whether in the conference room or outside, you know, the conference room, around coffee or a meal. And so with that being said, I want to thank Tasha, Brian, Nina, Meredith, Lauren for joining us tonight.